We have reached game week of the season-defining game for the Clemson Tigers. Florida State is coming to Clemson on Saturday for a noon ABC kickoff. To help me preview the game, we have Matt Goldin joining the channel. Matt, of course, is a writer for Shakin the Southland, and he is the host of the TigerNet Podcast with David Hood. Thanks for joining, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Ryan. Always good to come on and talk a little Clemson football.
Yeah, absolutely. You're always a great guest, and I appreciate you doing this. Let's start, I think, in the most obvious spot. I watched the entirety of the Florida State debacle in Chestnut Hill. They look terrible. And if not for a school record 18 penalties from Boston College, Florida State probably loses that game. Is that just a total, they're looking past Boston College, looking to Clemson, don't take too much from it? Or does that give you real optimism, apart from Clemson's performance, which we'll talk about in a minute?
I really just don't know what to take from it because, as I alluded to it on Twitter, Boston College seems to just play at a different level when it's the red bandana game. I believe 2022 was the red bandana game when Clemson was there and they slugged it out with us for a half. But yeah, I watched that game as well. And I mean, if Boston College doesn't commit 18 penalties, they win that game. I mean, that's an insane amount of penalties, and that's not really a good Boston College team. This is they just have not looked good. So I think look, so it reminds me a little bit of before the 2013 Clemson FSU game. I know we don't like to remember that, but when Clemson got taken, toe to toe with Boston College in Death Valley, and it was kind of like, okay, is Clemson really not as good as we thought? And not to say that Clemson's about to go beat FSU 51-14, although I'd love that. I really am kind of like, okay, maybe this FSU team's more human than we thought.
Yeah. So let's dive into this Florida State team. I did some digging into them. I found this really fascinating. So this is not really a commentary on the recruiting. This is the players they currently have on their roster today. So this is just the 11 starters on offense, the 11 starters on defense. Most of them are transfers. So it's not really a commentary on the recruiting, but the original coming out of high school 24/7 composite rankings have not very many blue chip, which is 4 and 5 stars for Florida State, and a heck of a lot for Clemson. Every single player on Clemson's starting offense was a blue chipper. And then I think before we even talk about that, we gotta look at this, because here's the other side of that. This is the age, just raw age of players based on birthdays. Nothing super analytical here. But what that gets you when you use the portal like Florida State does is it gets you a much more veteran team. They're bringing in a guy like Braden Fisk, who could have gone to Illinois State or Western Michigan. Those were his offers. And he goes to Western Michigan. He racks up a whole bunch of tackles for loss, enters the portal. So he's a 3-star, but he's really like a 5-star they get for a year. Jeremiah Byers, same thing. He had UTEP and a couple of HBCUs. He goes to UTEP. He's there for a full career. Then he comes to Florida State, and he was a very low 3-star. Now he's kind of like a high 4-star going in. So it's just a very different roster construction. What do you think? I guess 2 questions here. One, in the immediate term, does the age give them a meaningful advantage? And then 2, can they do this year in and year out? I know there'll be ups and downs, but they're going to lose a lot of guys. Can they just kind of do this again and then do it again the next year? Is that possible?
I mean, I think the age does give them an advantage. We've seen Clemson, the youth shows some of the inexperience pretty, it's happened. I mean, Klubnik has done very well in the past 2 weeks, but has made a few, mistakes, particularly in that Charleston Southern game that against a team like FSU can be a win or lose mistake. You kind of look at a guy like Tyler Brown, is incredibly talented, everything going for him, but he fumbles the punt. I mean, there are still little things that those guys are not 100% with that I think, having the age advantage is an advantage for FSU. Whether they can do this year in and year out, I don't know. They're going to lose. There's going to be a lot of turnover. I don't know that this, bringing in guys for a year, all these guys for a year is how you get to be a championship team. But do I think they could be they can average 9 to 10 wins, yeah, I think they can absolutely keep themselves in the upper third of the ACC doing this. I just don't know if this is really how you build a championship program, but I think it's good enough to, you know, average 9 to 10 wins and then occasionally be a CFP team.
What's so interesting is in the modern era, you've pretty much always had to have 50% or more of your roster be blue chippers, and they obviously haven't. But and I have an article that this video will be appended to that kind of gets into this, but they've basically circumvented the entire star rating system, because what they do is, Braden Fisk, Jared Verse was from Albany, right? He couldn't go to a big time school. So they let him go to Albany, and he proves that the recruiting services were wrong, and then they take him later. So they're essentially de-risking, letting schools like Albany, UTEP, Western Michigan take all the risk. Once those guys prove that they're actually very good, then they give them a scholarship. And on top of that, they don't have to develop them, and they only have to use the scholarship for a year or two, right? So they're not burning 2 years of scholarship as they're working their way up and becoming good. They're just waiting until they're good, wait until the risk is almost gone, and grabbing them. So, it's a total game changer. We'll see how viable this is long-term, because it is tough as a coach. You got to do this every year and keep repeating. So it definitely lends itself to kind of some ups and downs from year to year. All right, let's talk about Clemson. So obviously Duke was a debacle. Charleston Southern was good for a half, and then Florida Atlantic was good for a half. But it was the first half when I feel like it means a little bit more, and they're focused. I think you could write off a lot of the second half as being backups and losing their focus. How does the Clemson performance against the Florida Atlantic Owls change your perception of them, if at all?
Well, I think the past 2 weeks, I feel better going into the Florida State game than I did right after the Duke game. Because right after the Duke game, it was like, look, this team does not look good. And to be honest, Florida Atlantic, I mean, anytime you're dealing with a team from Florida, they're going to have guys that can play. I know it was mentioned during the broadcast, they had guys who were transfers in themselves from other major programs. So, Florida Atlantic, while I'm not going to sit here and try to say they were like an outstanding opponent, they're not bad. It's not the worst measuring stick. And I think the fact that Clemson dominated that game, completely, it really is, it helps me feel a little bit more focused. Helps me feel a little bit more confident that Clemson is focused and kind of settling in after that Duke debacle.
All right, well, we're continuing with Matt Goldin from Shakin the Southland and the TigerNet Podcast. Hey, by the way, if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, please do so. I'd really appreciate it. If you're a reader on Shakin the Southland and you're used to reading our articles, you can check out more from me and really frequent guest Matt Goldin on this channel. So definitely do that on YouTube. I'd really appreciate it. All right, Matt, let's keep going. So I think I kind of want to look at this from both angles. First of all, we've seen good Clemson for stretches, and we've seen a lot of bad Clemson. Where can Clemson, on the positive side, where can Clemson exploit Florida State? What are you optimistic or at least hopeful about?
I'm optimistic about that defense. I mean, that's a talented defense. We've seen a lot of good things and a lot of good young guys step up. Really excited about TJ Parker, probably one of the best players we had in the Duke game. There was a lot of bad that happened, but he was a bright spot. Over the past 2 games, I've really been more impressed with Barrett Carter. I know he had kind of a night to forget against Duke, but he's definitely stepped up in the past 2 weeks. So definitely excited for him. Interested to see. I know Andrew Mukaba's been day to day, so I've been happy with what I've seen with Khalil Barnes. So I think, again, young guy who might be able to be a playmaker, definitely a good one. So I think that defense is it's loaded with talent. So that's absolutely the first thing that gives me positivity. The second thing is that I think if Clemson, does what we know we can do, which is run the ball well, I think we can play ball control and kind of keep the ball away from Florida State. And that would be a huge thing. Seeing what Boston College is able to do to Florida State's defense with their mobile quarterback, I'm kind of wanting to see if we can let Cade run it a little bit. I know there's been some ifs on that, just with the zone read, not being able to get the handoff and off and stuff like that. But he's got the athletic ability. He could absolutely give that FSU defense fits if we can turn him loose and let him go.
I totally agree. We've seen it in very limited amounts with Cade. I think he's going to have to run and pick up big third downs, at least, turn what would be a second and 12, turn that into a second and 6, right? He's going to have to do that a lot. Castellanos for Boston College just kind of torched them through the air, but also on the ground. So I think that Florida State is going to play a lot of man coverage. So I'm going to flip this over. The thing I'm most worried about is that their cornerbacks are really good, and Clemson's receivers might not be, and they're just going to man them up and beat them again and again and again. The flip side to that is if your DBs are always keeping their eye on receivers, they're not keeping their eye on the quarterback. And so I think it's going to be imperative for Cade Klubnik to take advantage when he can, pick up some first downs, pick up at least a couple yards on the ground. He's got the speed to do it. So what are you worried about in this game?
Well, like you said, I mean, wide receiver play has just been inconsistent. And now with the injury to Cole Turner, that takes away one of the few deep threats. So I think that and just the youth of the wide receivers. I mean, there's I like Tyler Brown, like a lot what I'm seeing about from him. We've seen some flashes with Adam Randall, just not seeing necessarily the whole package on a lot of things. I think Tyler Brown and I think Antonio Williams are both very good and can do a lot of good for us, but just not having that deep threat player and that Cole Turner could have been that he showed us against North Carolina last year. I think that is that's one thing that I'm really hating that we're missing.
Yeah, and for all the criticisms Clemson has received for the mistakes, I almost think in some regard it's overblown, because what's happened is they're good enough to keep drives alive, but they don't have explosive plays. So they need to string together these long drives. And so they still shouldn't make the boneheaded mistakes they make at the 1 yard line, but they're more likely to, they just have more opportunities to make those mistakes because they're not picking up, they're not punting and they're not getting the 70-yard play typically. So I think they need to be more explosive, and I'm just concerned that they just won't be. Tyler Brown, Antonio Williams, one of them has got to step up. I love Will Shipley, and I really love Phil Maffa, who fairly consistently is the best player on Clemson's offense by PFF grade. He's great, but they're not guys who are going to break off 50-yard runs. So you've got maybe a 20-yard run here and there, but they've got to either find the explosiveness or just keep piecing together long drives. All right, I want to kind of zoom out a little bit and give you one kind of big picture question, and then we'll come back in for a final question about this game. So whether Clemson wins this game, wins out, goes to the college football playoff, or they kind of fumble their way through the season, maybe it's an 8-4 season, anywhere in there, or even better or worse, what does it take, if anything, before Dabo changes his roster construction philosophy? And I'm not suggesting he goes full Mike Norvell here, but is there a situation where he takes a defensive end next year with, 2 starters leaving for the second year in a row? Or do you just think he's not willing to do it and he'd retire before he does it?
I just really think that the Duke game has already kind of set that there's going to be changes made in the offseason. I think that Dabo is really realizing that even though he doesn't want to use the portal, he's going to have to. I think some of it, too, is going to be there's got to be planning for the portal. A lot of people last year in the offseason were like, well, why are we not taking this guy? Why are we not taking this guy? We didn't have scholarships. And a lot of that goes back to planning. And I think, again, it has to sort now, but I have to imagine the wheels are already starting to turn, and during the offseason, you're not going to see Clemson get in the situation where they're sitting at 86 scholarship players and there's all these talented guys coming around. I think we'll see the change. I just think we'll see the change sooner rather than later, and I really don't know that it's going to require Clemson being as bad as 8-4 or worse. I really think that Duke, and I just think that seeing how other teams have been able to use the portal, I think it's the wheels have already started to turn on that. I would just say again, we're not going to get. Yeah, you're right. We're not going to go full Mike Norvell. It's just fixing a few spots. It's just picking up a few guys here and there, and as many guys as Clemson has lost over the years on transfers, you got to start bringing them back in. I mean, it's just you got to try to at least break even on that. And so I really think this offseason, kind of regardless of how the season turns out, we'll start to see more of that.
Yeah, I sure hope so. And to your point, I don't even think, if they lose 10 guys to the portal, I don't even think they need 10 guys. But It might be 2, just really critical spots, right? Like it seems like this offseason they're really going to need a defensive end with both starters leaving, and not a ton of proven depth behind. I mean, TJ Parker, as you mentioned, you feel good about, but beyond that, maybe Cade Denhoff's the starter next year if you don't add a transfer, which might be okay, but right now you're not feeling great about it. So yeah, I think one thing we'll find out early on is does Clemson give out some additional scholarships in this class to kind of late takes, 3 stars, maybe guys that you're not super excited about? Did they fill those spots like they have recently done, or did they just say, hey, we got time, we could add a veteran, we don't have to fill the spot? So I think that's where you'll start to get an indication. All right. If you're ready, let me get a prediction. If you're willing to give a score, go for it. If you want to just give general thoughts on how you think it'll go, feel free to go for that.
Oh man. So, if you'd asked me this 2 weeks ago after the Deke loss, I would have probably not had any kind of positivity going into it. But the past 2 weeks, I've seen a lot of good things out of Clemson. And as you and I talked about off air, Clemson's just really good in Death Valley. It's hard to beat Clemson in Death Valley. Since the 2015 season, Clemson's lost 2 games, the Pitt game and last year's South Carolina game. I mean, it's a tough place to play. And I was poking around, reading some different articles today. Apparently, Clemson's also really good at playing at noon games. We've had a lot of them, so we do well with those. I don't think that's going to dampen the atmosphere too much. And I think I'm going to go bold. I'm going to say Clemson's going to win this 24-20.
Yeah, I could definitely see Clemson really stopping up the Florida State run game. You got to stop Jordan Travis and picking up those third downs with his legs. But if they could do that, I do think they have a puncher's chance. I don't think it's a crazy long shot. A week ago, if you had asked me on Friday, I would have picked Florida State, 41-17 or something, ugly. I'm kind of optimistic. I don't know. I wrote an article for TigerNet saying that hope is a dangerous thing from Shawshank Redemption's. Like, now you can be let down. I was already prepared to lose. Now I think they have a really good shot to win. Ultimately, though, I'm in prove it mode with these wide receivers. And I've been that way since 2020. And in 2020, Cornell Powell proved me wrong. I was shocked. I didn't believe it until 3/4 of the way through the year that he was actually good, and he was. And they went to the playoff. Last 2 years, I've kind of been right in thinking they weren't good. So happy to be proven wrong, but I think something more like maybe 28-31 or 21-28, something like that. I just worry about Clemson not being explosive enough. We've seen it against FAU, but I think FSU is a lot different with Fentrell Cypress and some of the DBs and the pass rush they have. So we'll be happy to be wrong. I think it's, again, a couple days ago, I'd say it with 95% confidence. Now I say it with 51% confidence. So moving in the right direction. Matt, thanks for joining. I appreciate you being a frequent guest here.
Absolutely. Always glad to come on, and hopefully we'll have a good win to talk about.